In this Revit demo, we're going to look at how to generate a presentation floor plan drawing. And to do this, we're going to use one of the sample files from the Autodesk folder. So if you want to just click on Open and then navigate on your C drive to Program Files, not Program Data, where the library items are located. This is a little different. So Program Files, Autodesk, and then Revit 2020, and look in the Samples folder here. You'll see 21 different RVT files that you can use to practice your Revit skills. And we're going to use this one called Residential Sample Project. A simple little single-family detached bungalow. Pretty basic geometry, but the nice thing about this file is it gives us a pretty good representation here of what a working drawing would look like. So in the browser, after I open the file, I'm going to double-click on First Floor. And you can see now that I've got a representation here again of what a working drawing would look like. They certainly get a little bit more complex than this, but we have a representation here of the technical data that we usually feature on a working drawing. And we want to communicate that, of course, to trades or to city review boards or to consultants. But when it comes time to present our design to a broader audience, perhaps a customer, a client, a community review board, we don't need to have all this technical data. So a presentation drawing, as the name suggests, is just something that's intended to present your ideas to that broader audience. We'll look at some examples in just a second here. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a duplicate. One of the easiest ways to just create a floor plan view that doesn't have all of the clutter of this technical information is to just go to your browser and right-click on First Floor and select Duplicate View. We'll just take the top option, and by taking the top option we get basically a duplicated view showing just the major sort of annotative elements and then of course the geometry. Notice that the dimensions, the notes, the tags, a whole bunch of other material here has been hidden, so we've already got a pretty good start to this. Before we go to the visibility graphic override settings and look at other things that we can hide, I'm just going to show you really quickly one of many sources, of course, you could track down on the internet if you need a reference for what a working drawing, or sorry, what a presentation drawing should look like. Obviously, if you're presenting information to a general audience, that's the kind of thing you're going to put on the website. So here's one of many architecture firms. This is Resolution 4 Architecture out of New York. And if you just click on projects, you can see little thumbnails of all of their buildings here. And any one of these, when you click on them, you'll be able to access lower down here the option to look at drawings. And what you'll see here is kind of an indication of where we're heading. As I said, we've taken out a lot of the annotative elements. We're going to go even a little further, and then we're going to look at ways that we can just kind of make the crucial elements maybe pop a little bit more. So as you can see here, some good heavy line weights on the walls, kind of subtle treatment of some of the other supplementary elements like the furniture, and this is just a good representation of what a presentation drawing should look like. So back into Revit. What we're going to do here, as I said, is we're going to hide a few other additional elements, and we're going to do that by clicking on the visibility graphic overrides, and this is going to be a window that we're going to spend a lot of time on. So the shortcut for that is just VG, and there we can see the visibility graphic overrides. And primarily when you're dealing with this window, you're accessing information here on the Model Categories tab, but right beside it there's a tab for the annotation elements. So we're going to do a little bit of editing here on both. On the Model tab, we want to get rid of the site origin. So this little kind of colored UCS symbol here, which is a fairly new addition for Revit, that can be turned off by just going down to the Site section, clicking on the little plus symbol, and then unchecking the box that says Internal Origin. And we're going to stay here on the Model Categories tab and drop down to Stairs, and we're also going to hide the riser lines. So we'll click Apply, and behind us there those things have been hidden, and then we're going to go over to the annotation categories and we're going to hide the elevations. We don't need to see those square marks with the arrowheads, so we can uncheck elevations, we can uncheck reference planes down below, and we can also uncheck sections. We don't need to see those either. So after we do all that, we'll click OK, and we'll go back to the view here of our main floor. And you can see that we've come quite a ways here from what was a fairly busy drawing with lots of technical information to something that's really quite nicely simplified. There's a few other things that we're going to do here before we start worrying about the graphics of the walls and the windows and other elements, and that is that we want to go down here to the View Control Bar, And we're going to change the detail level here from medium to coarse. So medium or fine are good detail levels to be working at when you're generating the model and you want to see all the intricate detail and information with regards to layers and walls and such. But when it comes time to generate drawings, whether they're working drawings or presentation drawings, typically we want to reduce this to something a little bit more graphically succinct, and that's why we use the coarse style. This particular RVT file happens to have wireframe set as the visual style, which is pretty uncommon, but we're just going to switch that now to hidden line, and you'll see that when we do that, it hides even more elements, so we get a nice, even further simplified view here of our floor plan. Once we get to this point, we've reduced all the crucial elements. Everything that we can see here represents a set or a composition that we want to keep. So from here on in, it's just about basically playing with the graphics to get something that looks maybe a little bit more succinct. So because of that, we're actually going to type in or make sure that your thin line setting is not on. So if you zoom in and you can't see any line weight there, then just make sure that you type TL, and that'll turn the line weights back on so that you can see them. And now you can see that we're getting even a little bit closer to something like what we saw in that sample image from the architecture firm. Next step is we're going to start looking at ways that we can kind of manage the line weights. Now the important thing to remember here is that we don't want to use the typical approach, which is to go to the Manage tab and adjust the object styles. If we adjust the object styles, we'll be setting different line weights and different patterns and such that would affect every view, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep the working drawing as it is, and we just want to make edits that affect this view. So like I mentioned before, we're just going to be using the visibility graphic overrides for a good portion of what we're going to do here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in so that I can kind of see in the upper left side here what the line weights look like on the walls. And this time when I type in VG, I'm going to pull the window off to the side a little bit here, so I'll be able to use my apply button and we'll be able to see the impact of our edits right away. So I'm going to use the scroll bar and drop down here towards the bottom right. And the first thing I'm going to do is show you how we can boost that line weight a little bit for the walls. So on visibility graphic overrides right down towards the bottom, we have a category here for walls. And you can see that here, prior to clicking the button, all these windows are blank, but as soon as we click there, it gives us the option to override. And what we're going to do is we're going to, in the cut column, specifically under lines, we're going to click on override. And when the window pops up here, we're going to change the weight. So the line weight, as I said, is set by object styles, and it's probably at 4 or 5. And we're just going to click here on this option here so that we can boost it up to something a little more substantial, like 6. I'll click OK, and I'll click Apply down here, and you'll be able to see the impact of that on the left side. So subtle, but it just got a little bit more substantial. And if we zoom out now, we can see again we're getting a little closer to our goal of having just a little bit more emphasis on the crucial elements like the walls and the partitions. So that would be the first step. Something else I can do here is you may have noticed that when I changed the wall line weights, these walls below the window at the sill didn't change. So there's a different setting for those because they're not being cut by this particular floor plan view, which of course is just a horizontal section. So I'm going to type in VG again, and I'm going to go back to that same section. And down below here now again with walls, I'm going to change the line setting for the projection category, and that's because again that portion of the wall isn't actually being cut. So if I click here just like I did before, I can access the weight and I can change that to something more substantial, like let's say 4. And I'll click apply, and you'll be able to see that again gets a little bit thicker. So once again, just kind of building the emphasis that I want for the walls. I mean, getting closer already here to something that looks a little bit more sort of clean, a little bit more sort of graphically succinct. Some other cleanup that I'm going to do here, this particular RVT file from Autodesk happens to have a material setting with its concrete materials that leaves this sand pattern. It's a little bit kind of cluttered. It's unnecessary, so I'm going to clean that up. And I'm going to do that by just going to the Manage tab and then clicking on the Materials Checkered Sphere. And these two materials in this file that have this sand pattern are concrete cast in place gray. And there's 2 of them. There's a lightweight concrete, and then there's a just regular concrete. So on both of those, I'm just going to click to select them. And over on the right here, where it lists the surface pattern for foreground, I'm going to change these to no pattern. So just up at the top here, I've got the option for no pattern. I'll click OK, and then I'm going to do that again for the second concrete cast in place material, and this just reduces the clutter a little bit more. I'll click OK. You can see those go away, and I'm left with just this plain white surface here with the black lines. Another option that you have if you're trying to emphasize the walls and maybe try to make some of the other features a little bit less apparent, more subtle, like for example these bathroom fixtures, is you can once again go to the visibility graphic overrides. So I'll type in VG, and I'm going to be looking for plumbing fixtures. So under plumbing fixtures, these once again are not being cut by my cut plane in my view range. So I'll be able to access the graphics that are controlling these lines by selecting here under the lines category. So I'll click in that spot, override appears. I can change the line weight to be something a little more substantial. I'm going to make it, let's see how 2 looks. And then more importantly here, I'm going to change the color. So instead of being black, I can choose a light gray and click apply. And it's a little hard to see on screen there, but those just got a little bit more subtle. So now instead of the black line, I see the gray. The overall effect when I zoom out is that I see the walls a little bit more clearly. Another tool that comes in very handy when you get to the presentation stage is found on the Modify tab, and this is the Linework tool. If you hover over the Linework tool, if you click on it now, you can select different types of lines. If there are parts of the drawing where you don't want to see any lines, where they do exist, like for example this seam that kind of separates the kitchen floor from the living room floor, you can just go with the default line type, which is invisible lines, and then when you click on that, you'll see it just vanishes. It's also a handy tool to use where maybe you've got a bunch of lines that are kind of close together and they're looking rather cluttered and kind of overlapping. So in this case here in the window, where I want to just kind of see something thinner and not see these big thick lines for the window panes, I can choose a different line style, like perhaps thin lines, and then just click there and you'll see that now I've got a much more subtle representation of those window panes. So with those steps, I clean the drawing up quite substantially, and I get to something that looks much more appropriate for putting on a poster or for putting on a website. I would also at this point add some text, and I can just do that with the regular text tool. So I might click on the Annotate tab and then click on Text. And for something this size that I've got set to display at 1/4 inch, the appropriate scale here might just be 1/4. So I'm going to click here on the Edit Type button and make a duplicate and specify that this is 1/4 inch. And I'm going to select a font here that doesn't have serifs. So it'll be a nice, just clean, simple looking font. I'm going to set the background to transparent. I don't want to see the white mask around the text. So transparent, I'm going to change the text size to 1/4 inch. And again, I'm going to change the font to something that has a nice clean look to it. Something like perhaps this Swiss 721 EXBT. I'll click and then of course just type in the text. And that's pretty straightforward. So you may have noticed that prior to doing this, I did have some text there before. So on my first floor, you can see that there are some labels here. And that's because this particular RVT file happens to have room objects placed inside these areas. So that's going to actually serve us well with the next step here. One of the things that occurs, of course, when you're doing presentation drawings is you realize that you're not stuck with just one style. And there's actually quite a bit of freedom that you have here to create different styles, and we're going to look at another alternative to what we're seeing here next. So once I've got this sort of essential set of steps completed where I've reduced this to its just basic elements, I'm going to make some additional copies, and I'll have the ability to kind of customize each of those. So once again here in the project browser, if I right click, I can make another duplicate, and I'm going to take the top option once again. And you'll see that it just names it first floor copy 1 of copy 1. I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this first floor color scheme. And because the original file from Autodesk had the room objects in it, you'll see here that what I can do is I can go to the properties window, and this button that says color scheme, where it says none at the moment, I can click on that. And then in the Edit Color Scheme window that pops up, I can change the category from spaces to rooms, and then I can just click on the name option here, and you'll see that what happens is it gives me these randomly generated colors, and when I click apply, you'll see that these colors are applied to each of these rooms. So the default in Revit, when you're creating walls, they are room bounding. So as you can see here, if I click on any one of these walls, they will be room bounding. And this default property creates a condition where I can place a room object in this space, and then now based on the name of the room, I'll get these different colors. I don't want to get too much into this. There's a lot of complexity that is associated with color schemes. They're a very versatile tool that's used for generating categories, of displaying areas and prices and a whole bunch of other things. But for graphic reasons, I can just go back here to the color scheme editing button, and I'm not stuck with these colors. I can change these as I wish, and I'm going to get rid of some of the bolder colors here and just go for maybe something a little bit more subtle. And you'll see the update here eventually. Perhaps because of limitations with video cards, the refresh on this isn't always immediate, so if I click apply, you'll see again it kind of lingers in this older set of colors. Eventually, perhaps after switching between visual styles here, it will catch up to what I had customized. But I'm not going to worry about that for now. There's lots of possibilities here with adding the colors. And another step beyond this that we can take is that we can add some shadows. So this is where we start to get a little bit maybe more bold with our presentation graphics. Down below here in the view control bar, we can just turn the shadows on, and you can see that that adds a nice read here to the walls. They gain a little bit of depth, a little bit of emphasis. They kind of pop into the foreground a little bit more, and it's a really nice way of sort of reading a floor plan. As I said, eventually here, my video card will allow these colors to catch up. I'll come back to that view when that's done. So I'm going to go back to the initial presentation drawing here, and I'm going to make another copy and show you how you can go a little further and even make additional edits to generate a different look. So once again, in the browser, I'm going to right click on first floor color scheme. I'm going to select duplicate, take the top option, and this one still has the color schemes on, so I'm just going to make sure over here in the properties window where it says name, I'm going to just set this back to none and make sure that I change this, make sure it's on hidden line. There we go. Notice the shadows are still on. I'm going to turn those off temporarily. And I'm going to change the material setting here for the floor so that we gain a little bit of a darker sort of background, I guess, to this view. And then we're going to look at other ways that we can change the appearance of the walls to get a different look. So with this particular file, there's a wood floor material which I can find on the Manage tab, and clicking on the material sphere here. Down below we'll see it's just called wood flooring. And you can see that it's set to display with a shaded color and also a foreground pattern. So I'm going to change this so that I can see something that kind of comes across as sort of a neutral sort of gray or kind of darker tone. And the way that I do that is I change the pattern here. I'm going to go for something that I'm going to edit and make a little bit more dense. And I'm going to look for the diagonal up pattern. I can find that by clicking over here on the pattern type. So there's a subtle distinction here where I want to display this as a drafting pattern as opposed to a model pattern. And then I'll be able to access the diagonal up small. I'll click OK. And I'm going to leave the color as black. But before I display this, I want to actually show a way to edit this and make it a little bit more dense. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to go now on the Manage tab to Additional Settings. And I'm going to select Fill Patterns, and I'm going to find that diagonal up, and I want the small one, of course, diagonal down, up, small. I'm going to click on the pencil tool here to edit it, and I'm going to change the line spacing from 1/16 of an inch to something much more dense. So I'm going to go to 1/100th of an inch. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK again. And then I'm just going to make sure that I can actually see this. So I'm going to go back to my material settings for the wood flooring. And I'm going to make sure here that I can see Okay, in order to get the surface pattern here to display on the floor, we actually have to specify that it is a background element. So I'm going to just, in this box here, once again select diagonal up small, click OK, and then click apply. And you'll see the effect of that now is that I have a tone here, kind of a mid-gray tone. If you zoom in here, you can see that it's actually a display of that diagonal pattern. It's really tight and dense, and the overall effect here is that I add that kind of mid-gray tone to the floor. Now what that means is that I can now play around with the settings here for the wall. I don't have to be stuck with this just kind of default black lines and white fill. Once again, we'll go to the visibility graphic overrides to control this, and down at the bottom where we see the walls, we're going to go to the section here, the column that's described as the cut category, and we've already played around here with the lines. So what we're going to do is just click on patterns, and once again just set an override, and we want this to be in the foreground section. We're going to change the color here to black, and we're going to change the pattern to solid. So right at the top of the list here you can see solid fill. We'll click OK, we'll click apply, and you can see the result is that now we've got this fairly common way of displaying the building for a presentation drawing, which involves this solid black fill. But that's not it, of course. We've got further edits that we can make if we want to customize this even further. We'll just click VG once again, and we don't have to do black. We can do something else, a mid-gray perhaps, or maybe just to kind of play around with this a little further, we'll click on that and we'll change the black to white. And then in addition to that, we don't have to have black lines. Maybe we can switch these to white and see how that looks. We'll click there, we'll change the color here to white, click OK. And with the white lines and the black the white walls, maybe we're kind of losing sight of this a little bit, so I'll just go back to visibility graphic overrides once again, and I'm going to change the white fill on the walls to maybe something a little bit in between black and white. And there we go. So lots that you can do here to play around with the styles. Like I did with the color schemes, I can now turn the shadows on and see that I get some really interesting sort of alternatives to what was initially displayed as just this kind of stark standard sort of black and white working drawing. So Revit gives you lots of good options here for generating presentation drawings. And make the duplicates, and then just remember to use visibility graphic overrides, and that way settings that you make in one won't have a negative impact on settings that you make in another.